Okay, so welcome back. Let's recap what we've done so far. We have talked about the Phillips curve and the role that deviations of inflation from the expectation of inflation plays in determining how far above the growth rate of output is from its natural rate. We talked about the central bank's utility function and the role that that played in first being consistent with the central bank's dual mandate, trying to stabilize inflation while maximizing employment, or in this case, it was increasing output, maximizing output. We discussed the parameters that determined whether the central bank was more hawkish or more dovish on inflation. Hawkish meaning they care very much about inflation. They want to stabilize inflation even if it comes at a cost of changes in output above its natural rate, or being dovish, where they care way more about increasing output above the natural rate than they do trying to stabilize inflation. Now, I've said this before, I'll say it again just to be perfectly clear. There are times where dovish policies are definitely the way to go. There are times where hawkish policies are the way to go. And we'll discuss that a little bit later. Once we get into the new Keynesian model, we'll discuss that. But we figured out what the optimal rate of inflation was and how it was determined, and how it was ultimately a combination between how sensitive the public was to deviations in inflation from the expectation of inflation and how hawkish or dovish the central bank was. Right? So being a combination of the two, that determines what the optimal rate of inflation is going to be, right? So that pi equals lambda times alpha. Lambda, how hawkish the central bank is or how dovish the central bank is. Alpha being how sensitive the economy is to deviations in inflation from the expectations, right? Namely, how sensitive they are to that quote unquote signal extraction problem I was talking about. So now we're going to be discussing like a lot of the game theory. We're going to talk about how the game theory is working here. We're going to deal with two different scenarios. One where we have adaptive expectations, meaning the central bank can try to trick the public into increasing output above the natural rate for a little bit. They can't do it forever, but they can do it at least for a little bit. And eventually the public adapts their expectations to what's happening. There's also rational expectations. Under rational expectations, you can't be fooled because everybody knows exactly what is going to happen. Everybody knows the information set of all players in the games, like that example I gave earlier with Battleship, right? Under adaptive expectations, if you get cheated, right, someone's cheating in the game, then, you might get fooled a few times before you eventually go, I think they're cheating on me, or I think they're cheating on the game. Under rational expectations, you know they're already going to be a cheater. So either you are also going to cheat or you're just not going to play, right? Another example would be, let's say, dating markets, right? Cheating kind of runs rampant in dating markets. I'm sure a lot of us have either been cheated on or seen someone who has been cheated on, have a friend that's been cheated on, something of that nature, right? When that kind of stuff happens, right? Under adaptive expectations, this agent walks into the relationship assuming there won't be any cheating, assuming that there is honest behavior across the board. They get cheated on, they go, okay, yeah, that really sucked. Let's not have that happen again, right? They go into another relationship. They got a little bit wiser. They could kind of pick out certain signals, right? They could tell what was going on, right? The signal extraction problem was kind of beginning to shrink a little bit, right? It's not as much of a problem anymore. So, okay, they do that. Then, let's say they get cheated on in the next relationship. Well, now they've really got a pretty decently sized information set for them to run off of. So they go, let's say they start trying to enter into a third relationship. Obviously, when you're on the dating market, you generally have a number of potential candidates from which you can choose. Well, they choose to restrict their candidate pool down to those that are not giving those signals that they received previously. Therefore, they're going, okay, yeah, this person did this and this and this. They seemed a little shifty with this. Those might be signals that can indicate cheating type behavior. I'm going to cut that out entirely, and I'm going to go for people who don't cheat. Eventually, you would find somebody who is also not a cheater. Under rational expectations, right, that's basically you right off the board. You can look at someone and go, they're going to cheat. I don't know what it is, but they're going to cheat. Therefore, you don't interact with them. So that's the difference between rational and adaptive expectations. Well, there are two different types of results in this model as a result of the differences in adaptive and rational expectations. So we're going to cover adaptive expectations first, and then we're going to go into rational expectations. So under adaptive expectations, what happens is the central bank is going to announce some kind of policy regarding inflation. They're going to announce this policy and they're going to go, hey, this is what we're going to want, right? So let's say the central bank announces an inflation policy of pi equals 0, right? They're going to announce that there is going to be 0 inflation, right? The price level will be consistent over time. Well, they announce that under adaptive expectations. Public sets their expected inflation equal to 0. So they set the expected inflation rate to 0. Therefore, when we look at the Phillips curve, when we look at this, we plug in 0 for expected inflation. And we want to simplify that a little bit. We get this. Right? Because they expect inflation to be 0. They expect there to be no change in the price level. But, well, this is that first relationship where you don't expect this person to cheat on you, and then they cheat on you, and you're like, oh my God, why did that happen? What? Oh my God, I can't believe I was so foolish. I can't believe I got tricked into this. How did I not see this coming? Because the central bank wants to announce an inflation rate of 0. So they manage their expectations, they manage the public's expectations by setting the expected inflation rate to 0. So they managed expectations such that the public thinks inflation will be 0. But if we remember, there's a big but here. I like big buts and you can't lie. That the monetary authority will deny rate F. Screw it. I'm terrible at those things. Remember, the optimal inflation rate is lambda times alpha, right? That was the utility maximizing rate of inflation for the central bank. So the public thinks inflation is going to be 0. But actual inflation is not going to be equal to what expected inflation was set to. So if I plug pi star in, which is lambda alpha in for pi, in the Phillips curve, this is what I get. And if I want to simplify this a little bit more, is that. Right? Well, lambda times alpha squared, lambda is positive, alpha is positive. Therefore, the rate of output, the actual rate of output, will be above the natural rate. So they've increased output. Right? The central bank should be proud of themselves. Hey, look, we increased output. Isn't that awesome? Right? Well, not so fast. Let's just assume for a second, they don't take very long to catch up on what's happening. It doesn't take them very long at all to pick up on what's happening. Right, so they're a little gullible, they're a little naive. The public wised up. So tomorrow, the central bank announces that inflation tomorrow will be 0, right? So if we've got tomorrow's Phillips curve, right, if we got that, because we shifted everything forward one period because we're in the next day, the next time period, right? Well, now the central bank announces an inflation rate of 0. Central bank, or the public knows the central bank's full of crap. They know the central bank is not going to be engaging in policies where they will actually commit to an inflation rate of 0, right? Because the central bank had every incentive to announce that inflation would be 0, right? But when the time comes to pay the piper, when the time comes to actually make good on their promise, they no longer have an incentive to do so. That's where the time inconsistency problem shows up, right? You say you're going to do one thing, but then when the opportunity presents itself, you don't do it, right? So in the event of, a relationship where somebody cheats, right? You go into the relationship, everyone's going to go, oh God, I'll never cheat. I'll never cheat on you. Why would I do that? Right? I mean, that's pretty much standard behavior. But problem is, they'll say that at the beginning, but when it comes time for them to not cheat, when they're in that situation, they're like, should I cheat or should I not cheat? They're going to go, screw it, cheat. That's time inconsistency. So the time inconsistency here is what the inflation rate is and how it deviates from what the expected rate of inflation is. So if the public knows the central bank is now lying, right? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Well, they're not going to get fooled twice. They set expected inflation equal to lambda times alpha. So when we look at the Phillips curve, we get what actual inflation is, and we subtract out what expected inflation is, right? Which is lambda times alpha. Well, lambda times alpha minus lambda times alpha is just alpha times 0. So we get output being equal to the natural rate plus any source of non-monetary policy shocks. So if this is a 2-period game, the first period they can get tricked, but in the second period they go, not so fast. We know what you're doing. We know you are not going to behave in an honest fashion, therefore we're not going to let you try to trick us again. So now the inflation rate is going to be equal to lambda times alpha, which is consistent with what the expectations were for the inflation rate. And that will wrap up this particular part. The next part we'll talk about rational expectations. And then we'll talk about different trigger strategies, things like that. So there'll be, 2 more videos coming after this. So thanks for watching. Just seems like the right thing to do to just keep these videos relatively short. And you can just kind of watch a bunch of these different things with different cases at your leisure rather than just having to watch this entire thing, pause it, and all that stuff. We can cover each little individual subtopic via a shorter video. So that is what we've got. This is what happens under under adaptive expectations. Actually, before we wrap this up, let me say one more thing, right? Let's talk about trigger strategies. This is essentially a trigger strategy. What makes it a trigger strategy? Well, the thing that makes it a trigger strategy is as soon as the public sees what happened, as soon as the public realizes that they've been tricked, they've been duped, right? They've been fooled. Well, they go, yeah, I don't trust you anymore. They no longer trust the central bank. The reputation of the central bank, I'll just say CB for central bank, reputation of the central bank is tarnished. This is what's known as a grim trigger strategy. With a grim trigger strategy or a trigger strategy, what happens is 2 parties may not fully trust one another, but they'll go, I'm going to behave this way as long as I see you behaving this way. Right? But as soon as you start to kind of act a little sketchy, as soon as you start to behave in a way that's deviating from what I'm kind of expecting you to do and what I'm kind of trusting you to do, as soon as you do that, I pull the trigger. Right? Basically, I shoot you. Well, if they're following each other and the central bank is behaving in a way that is consistent with what the public can expect them to do, right? There's no trust being violated yet, right? Then they will keep setting the expected inflation rate to 0 as long as the Fed sets inflation to 0. But as soon as the central bank deviates from that plan, as soon as the central bank says, we can increase inflation to lambda times alpha, then the next period, expected inflation is lambda times alpha. Essentially, they just used a grim trigger strategy, right? So that is where the trigger strategy shows up in this particular game. So the next game is going to look at rational expectations and how things are a little different. So thanks for watching, and until next time, peace out. or something. I don't know, whatever the cool kids say these days. I don't know.